My sister falsely accused me of something truly devastating and unforgivable just to keep her own dark secret hidden. And as a result, I lost my job, my friends, my reputation, everything I cared about. Until, years later, her husband's private. Investigators stumbled upon a series of incriminating text messages that not only exposed the truth, but completely flipped the narrative and forced everyone to see who the real villain was all along. A private investigator hired by my sister's husband uncovered text messages that completely changed everything. I'm a 33-year-old man, and my relationship with my family, my parents and 31-year-old sister, Jenna, has always been distant. We rarely talk, and for a long time, I just accepted that's how it was. This estrangement goes back years, rooted in old events. For over a decade, I haven't been invited to any family get-togethers, including holidays or weddings. It's been an unspoken, mutual agreement. Recently, things took an unexpected turn. Last year, my sister Jenna and her husband Mark had a son. A few weeks ago, I got a formal invitation in the mail for my nephew's first birthday party. It came directly from Mark. I recognized his handwriting from a thank you card he'd sent years ago for a wedding gift. Getting this invitation was a real shock. I read it several times to make sure I wasn't mistaken. It was addressed to me, and it was for a family event. After thinking it over for a few days, I decided to go. I figured enough time had passed. I wasn't expecting a warm welcome or a sudden family reunion, but I felt it was the right thing to do. Mark had made an effort by sending the invitation, and I wanted to respond positively. I ordered a classic set of children's books online for my nephew and got the day off work. I didn't mention the invitation to anyone, just prepared for the party. About a week before the event, my mother called. We hadn't spoken on the phone in years. I answered, and she immediately launched into it. No pleasantries. Her voice was flat. She told me the invitation was a mistake, explaining that Mark had sent it without talking to Jenna first. My mother said Jenna wasn't comfortable with me being there, and my presence would create tension. It would be better if I didn't come. She said she was calling to avoid awkwardness on the day. She wasn't yelling or emotional, but her words were firm. She wasn't asking. She was telling me. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I didn't argue or ask questions. I simply said, "I understand," and hung up. Right after, I canceled the gift order online. The refund came through the next day. Then, I went to my phone contacts and blocked my mother's number. I did the same for my father's and Jenna's numbers. I didn't feel angry, just like a final line had been drawn, and there was nothing left to say. A few days later, my father started emailing me. His first email was short and confused, asking why his calls weren't going through. When I didn't reply, he sent another. He wrote that my mother told him I was refusing their calls and that I was acting like a child, being unnecessarily cruel to her. He claimed she was just trying to keep the peace and prevent a difficult situation. He called my decision to block them an extreme overreaction and blamed my behavior for our family's brokenness. He ended by demanding I unblock their numbers and call my mother to apologize for my hostile actions. I haven't replied to any of his emails and don't plan to. I've moved them to a separate inbox folder. To me, it's simple. They made it clear I'm not welcome. I've accepted that by blocking them, just making the existing separation official. There's no point in keeping communication open with people who actively exclude me. They seem to think I should be available when they choose, but invisible when they don't want me around. I don't agree with those terms. So, am I the jerk for cutting off my parents and making our long-standing arrangement permanent? Many people who commented on my previous post agreed I was not the jerk, but several pointed out that there was clearly a bigger story. They're right. I didn't include the full history originally because I wanted judgment on my recent actions, not the past. But I understand why more context is needed. I'm not looking for sympathy, just laying out the facts. This goes back 15 years, to when I was 18. My sister, Jenna, was 16 and started acting very secretive, staying out late, constantly texting. I didn't think much of it until I found out she was dating a much older man, around 21 or 22. Our parents were very strict, and I knew they'd never approve. My involvement was minimal. I wasn't her parent, and I was busy with my own life, working to save for college. I did talk to her once, telling her she was taking a big risk and needed to be careful. I didn't threaten to tell our parents because I felt it was her life and her choice. However, my position changed one night. I came home from work after midnight, and found her trying to sneak back into the house through a window. I confronted her calmly. I told her her behavior was becoming dangerous and she couldn't keep lying to our parents to this extent. I told her she needed to tell them about her boyfriend, or I would have to. I was genuinely concerned for her safety. I gave her an ultimatum. She had until the end of the weekend to talk to them, or I'd tell them what I knew on Sunday evening. I thought I was being a responsible older brother. The weekend passed, and she didn't speak to them. On Sunday afternoon, my parents asked me to sit with them in the living room. They both looked serious and pale. Jenna was crying on the couch next to them. My father told me Jenna had told them something very serious. My mother then said Jenna had made a terrible accusation against me. My sister, looking at the floor, claimed I had been sexually abusing her for several years. I was in shock. I immediately denied everything. I tried to explain the truth about her secret boyfriend, about the ultimatum I'd given her. I said she was doing this to distract them and discredit me so they wouldn't believe anything I said. They refused to listen. My words had no effect. My mother started crying, and my father called me sick. They didn't believe me. They believed her completely. They told me to pack a bag with essentials and leave the house. After I did, they informed me they had already called the police. What followed was the complete destruction of my life. One day, I was an 18-year-old high school student. The next, an accused felon. I was arrested that evening. Since I was legally an adult and she was a minor, the system wasn't on my side. My family offered no support. I had to rely on a public defender. The case became her word against mine. There was no physical evidence to support her claim, but also no evidence to disprove it. The entire case rested on her testimony. In court, she was a very compelling witness, crying and providing a detailed, fabricated narrative of abuse. When my lawyer tried to bring up her relationship with the older man as a possible motive for the lie, the prosecution spun it as an attack on her character, a classic example of victim blaming. It made me look even more guilty. My own parents testified against me, talking about how my personality had changed, how I'd become sullen and withdrawn in the months leading up to the accusation. They misinterpreted normal teenage behavior as a sign of guilt. They bought her story because it was the one they wanted to believe. Ultimately, I wasn't convicted of the most serious charge, but I was found guilty of a lesser felony sex offense. The judge sentenced me to several years of probation and, most significantly, ordered me to register as a sex offender. That registration followed me everywhere. My college plans vanished. I couldn't get student loans. Finding a job became incredibly difficult. Most applications asked about felony convictions, and telling the truth usually ended the conversation. Finding a place to live was just as hard, with restrictions on how close I could live to schools, parks, or playgrounds. For 5 years, I had to report to the local police regularly, informing them of my address, my job, my car, and any online accounts. My life was an open book to law enforcement. After the trial, my entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, cut off contact. It was as if I'd ceased to exist. I served my probation, completed my 5 years on the registry, and learned to live a very quiet, isolated life. I found work in a warehouse where background checks were less strict and an apartment in a compliant area. I built a small, self-contained life for myself. I never tried to contact my family again. This is the history that led to the current situation. This is why receiving an invitation to a child's birthday party was so jarring, and why being disinvited wasn't a surprise. And it's why I feel no guilt for blocking their numbers. From my perspective, there's no relationship left to salvage. There hasn't been one for a very long time. Something truly unbelievable happened a few days after my last update. I got a call from an unrecognized number. My first instinct was to ignore it, as I usually do, but for some reason, I answered. The man on the other end had a professional voice and introduced himself as a private investigator. My mind immediately went to a bad place. I assumed my parents had hired him to harass me or get information. I was about to hang up when he quickly said, "Please, just give me 1 minute. I am not working for your parents. I was hired by Mark, your sister's husband." That stopped me cold. It made no sense. Why would my sister's husband hire a PI to contact me? The investigator seemed to understand my confusion. He explained that Mark had hired him several months ago. Mark had become increasingly worried about Jenna's behavior during their marriage, describing her as having patterns of dishonesty, constructing elaborate lies about insignificant things, and prone to sudden, explosive fits of anger. They'd have huge, dramatic arguments that came out of nowhere. Mark felt something was fundamentally wrong but couldn't pinpoint the source. The PI said his initial job was to do a full background check on Jenna and look into her financial and social activities. Mark's main concern was a possible affair. The investigator did his job, delving into her entire life, past and present. Naturally, his investigation led him to the events that happened when she was 16, the accusation that had defined my life for so long. This is where the story takes a turn I still find hard to process. The investigator told me that as part of his digital forensics work, he managed to recover data from an old cloud storage account Jenna had used as a teenager and long forgotten about. Stored there were archives of old message logs from an instant messaging app she and her friends used back then. He found a specific conversation, timestamped, that took place over the 3 days between when I gave her the ultimatum and when she made the accusation to our parents. The investigator then started reading excerpts of these messages to me over the phone. I listened in silence. Jenna's messages were full of panic. She wrote to her friend that I had found out about her older boyfriend. She was terrified I was going to tell our parents and her life would be ruined. Her friend asked what she planned to do. Jenna's reply was chillingly clear. She wrote that she needed to do something big, something that would ensure our parents would never believe a word I said. She needed to make me the enemy. Then, she laid out her plan with chilling clarity. She would tell our parents I had been touching her. She described it as the perfect plan, reasoning it was an accusation so serious no one would ever question her, and it would solve her problem by getting me removed from the house and her life. She explicitly wrote this would keep her secret relationships safe. After reading these parts, the investigator told me he had presented his complete findings, including the full transcripts, to Mark a few days earlier. He said Mark was completely devastated. He had been married to Jenna for 4 years, they had a child together, and everything he thought he knew about his wife had been built on lies. The investigator said Mark wanted to speak with me directly, was deeply sorry, and wanted to help. He gave me Mark's personal cell phone number and encouraged me to call him. I ended the call with the investigator and sat in silence for a long time. It was a lot to process. After about an hour, I decided to call the number. Mark answered on the first ring, his voice strained and heavy. The first words he said were, "I am so sorry." He repeated it over and over. He told me he had no idea about any of it. He said he'd always felt something about the story of her past was off. Jenna would get intensely angry and defensive whenever he tried to bring it up, so he'd learned to stop asking. He told me, without hesitation, that he believed me. He also explained the birthday party invitation. He said he'd sent it because he had a gut feeling something was wrong with the family story about me, and he wanted to try to open a door, even just a little. When Jenna found out he'd sent it, she had a complete meltdown. She screamed at him for hours and threatened to take their son and leave him if he ever tried to contact me again. That was the event that pushed him to hire the private investigator. The call lasted for nearly 30 minutes. He ended it by promising to send me the full transcripts of the messages and any other evidence the investigator found. He said he would support me in any way he could, including testifying on my behalf to finally clear my name. I told him I'd think about it. The events following my conversation with Mark have been swift and decisive. True to his word, he emailed me the complete, unredacted transcripts of Jenna's conversations, along with the detailed PI report. Reading the messages in their entirety was a surreal experience. It wasn't emotional for me in the way people might expect. There was no anger or sadness. It was just cold confirmation of what I'd known to be true for 15 years. This was the proof. Mark called me again a day later. He told me he had confronted Jenna. He described the scene. He waited for their son to be asleep, then sat her down and presented her with printed copies of the messages. He said her initial reaction was denial. She accused him of forging the documents and screamed that he was conspiring with me to ruin her life. She became hysterical. Mark said he remained calm, simply pointing to the evidence and refusing to engage with her accusations. When it became clear her anger and denials weren't working, her strategy shifted. She collapsed, crying uncontrollably, and through her tears, admitted everything. She confessed she had made it all up, trying to justify her actions by saying, She was just a scared 16-year-old girl who didn't want to get in trouble. She claimed she didn't understand the consequences of her lie. Mark said her confession felt less like genuine remorse and more like a final, desperate attempt to gain his sympathy. The conversation didn't end there. It escalated when Mark told her he could no longer be married to her. She became violent, physically attacking him, hitting and scratching. He had to physically restrain her to stop her from hurting herself or him further. After she exhausted herself, he left the room, locked himself in their home office, and called his lawyer. The next morning, he officially filed for divorce. He also filed for an emergency order for temporary sole custody of their son, citing Jenna's confession, her history of manipulation, and her violent instability as reasons she was an unfit parent. The fallout spread quickly. Mark, in a move he described as necessary for total transparency and accountability, forwarded the investigators' entire report, including the message transcripts, to our parents. It didn't take long for them to react. My father called my phone repeatedly, but it was blocked. The next day, my parents showed up at my apartment building. I have no idea how they found my address, but I assume public information from the sex offender registry made it possible. I was home. They buzzed my apartment for several minutes, and when I didn't answer, they just stood in the lobby and started talking loudly at my door. My mother was crying, her words clear through the door. She wasn't crying for me or for the 15 years of my life that were stolen. She was crying for Jenna. She wailed about how Jenna's life was now ruined. She begged me through the door to talk to Mark, to convince him to stop the divorce, saying I needed to find it in my heart to forgive Jenna so our family could begin to heal. The idea was absurd. They wanted me, the victim of the lie, to fix the damage caused by its revelation. I didn't respond. I sat on my couch in silence and waited. After nearly an hour, they finally gave up and left. Once they were gone, I made a call. I contacted a recommended lawyer who specializes in wrongful convictions. I met with him the next day, providing all the evidence Mark had sent. My lawyer reviewed everything and told me with high confidence that we have an incredibly strong case to have my conviction formally vacated. The legal process for that has already begun. I have not spoken a single word to my parents or my sister. It has been several months since my last update, and a number of things have been finalized. I feel I should provide one last post to close this chapter, as there will be no more updates after this. The story has reached its conclusion. On the legal front, events proceeded as my lawyer predicted. We petitioned the court to vacate my conviction based on the new evidence. The prosecutor's office reviewed the case and did not oppose our motion. Jenna's confession in the text messages was undeniable. There was a brief hearing, which I attended but wasn't required to speak. The judge formally overturned the conviction and vacated the judgment against me. My name has been removed from the sex offender registry. Legally, the crime I was convicted of no longer exists on my record. It's as if it never happened. Jenna's life has changed completely. Her divorce from Mark is final. As part of the settlement and due to the evidence of her behavior, Mark was granted primary physical and legal custody of their son. Jenna has limited, supervised visitation rights. Mark keeps me informed from a distance, feeling he owes me that. He tells me Jenna is in some form of intensive therapy, but she continues to shift blame for her situation onto everyone but herself. The situation with my parents has also concluded. From what Mark has told me, they are entirely focused on supporting Jenna, spending a significant amount of their savings on her legal battles and current living expenses. As for me, my life continues. I am legally free from the conviction that shadowed me for 15 years, but there has been no moment of catharsis. No good feeling when the judge's gavel fell, no sudden wave of relief. The past is not erased. The years I spent on probation and on the registry still happened. There are no more updates to give. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time to read this.